Today's episode is part of our Season 2 series on the theme of home. Welcome to another episode of Art Heals All Wounds, where we explore the intersection between art and well-being. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. For just a second, think about the ways that the built environment of your town or city shapes your actions. Do you have safe and reliable public transit nearby, or do you need to drive? And if so, are the roads in good shape? Is traffic controlled safely in your area? Can you walk where you need to go? If you have a disability, are buildings and public spaces and streets accessible to you? If you said yes to all of these questions, please let me know where you're living. Today I talked to someone who has been a big inspiration to me in terms of how I think about art and its potential to create change. Fay Darmawi is the founder and executive director of the SF Urban Film Fest. Fay has a background in urban planning, affordable housing financing, and screenwriting. One thing that is clear to Fay is that when there are discussions about issues of urban planning, it's often the same people in the room. How do you get the communities that will be affected by the decisions being made not only in on the conversation, but leading it? Fay started the SF Urban Film Fest as a way to leverage the power of storytelling to bring more people into the conversation around urban planning. As humans, we're drawn to storytelling as a way to connect to topics of all kinds. Through story, we not only learn about an issue, we become emotionally engaged with it. When we become emotionally engaged, we talk about how things could be different, how we can address a certain problem, or follow the example we saw in the story. SF Urban Film Fest's mission is to show us that the built environment and urban planning surrounding us is not an immutable end. In the chaos brought by the pandemic, now is the time to create changes that address the inequities highlighted by COVID's uneven toll. We can make different choices. Let's start that conversation. Fay Darmawi started the SF Urban Film Fest 8 years ago as a way to get different people in the room, as she puts it, when it comes to discussions around urban planning. It's a brilliant event with films that address different aspects of planning as well as other systems that aren't serving the communities that use them. The films vary in terms of showing the problem and, in many cases, showing how communities have worked together to address the problem and create change. The Festival of 2022 was able to host in-person screenings and other events, and the focus in some of them were on cultural districts. If you listened to last week's episode, you may remember me saying that despite gentrification, there are very vigorous efforts to ensure that the unique communities that have created the cultural mosaic of San Francisco remain. A cultural district is a geographical area defined by the cultural and historical contribution to the city by the residents, artists, and business leaders of that community. Last week, I talked about the Mission District, and there is a Calle 24 Latino Cultural District. There are more districts. There's the Japantown Cultural District, the Compton's Transgender Cultural District, Soma Pilipinas Cultural District, the African American Arts and Cultural District, the Leather and LGBTQ Cultural District, the Castro LGBTQ Cultural District, and the American Indian Cultural District. I asked Fay to explain more about what these cultural districts are and how they help to not only defend communities against gentrification, but actually revitalize San Francisco in a way that is both equitable and sustainable. Before we meet today's guest, I want to tell you about an app called Newsly. Newsly is an all-in-one audio super app for iOS and Android. There really hasn't been an app like Newsly before now. Newsly picks up all of the trending articles on the web and reads them to you in a natural human voice. You can find any topic you're interested in, sports, politics, or art. I've loved using this app. I listen to it when I'm commuting or when I'm gardening or while I'm cooking, anytime where I want to catch a little bit of news, but my hands are full or I can't stop to read. You can also find trending podcasts from over 50 countries on Newsly, including Art Heals All Wounds. Newsly has become my go-to listening app for podcasts. If you want to try Newsly yourself, just download it from www.newsly.me. And if you use the promo code ARTHEALS, you'll get a free 1-month premium subscription. I'll include all of this info in the show notes so that you can just click on the link and use the Art Heals promo to get your free trial. Now, let's meet this week's guest. Hi, Fay. Thank you so much for being on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. Can you start by introducing yourself by telling us who you are and what you do?
Hi, Pam. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
You too.
My name is Fay Darmawi, and I'm the founder and executive director of the SF Urban Film Fest. And it is a 8-year-old storytelling organization based here in San Francisco.
It's really a unique festival experience, in my opinion. I had never been to a festival like this before I went to this, and I try to go every year because I learned so much. This is really about the intersection of storytelling and urban issues. Can you talk about that? How did you get started? What's your background? Why is this a good way to approach these issues?
Yes, thanks for asking those questions. I think there's like 7 questions in that question.
Exactly.
The festival and the films are really the appetizers and the incentives for people to come to the convenings that we put together. It's the storytelling, it's the emotional connection to people and places. So the films and the exhibitions and the performances attract the people. And then the second half of all our programs is a analysis and hopefully a set of calls to action with respect to urban issues, specifically around injustice and inequity and how we can create a more resilient future for all of us in cities. Is it a good idea to approach this way? I'm not actually sure, but every other way seems to be failing. So it seems like people can relate to storytelling because we're all naturally born storytellers. Whether the film festival that happens once a year for a week can push the needle in terms of more just resource allocation, that's to be determined. But really, that's not our specific goal, because what we really want to do is have people experience an epiphany, meaning that they open their eyes, and when they walk through their neighborhood or their community or their city, that they see something that they haven't seen before and they start to ask questions. Really, it's a tool for having our audiences experience life differently and maybe try to do something about it.
Well, I want to go back to that, but before we do, tell us more about yourself. What's your background, and what drew you to create an event like this?
It's really an amalgamation of all my different backgrounds. The festival draws on my background as an urban planner and my background in affordable housing finance, my background in screenwriting. So you can see all those little threads in the way that we go about our business at the film festival. I have a master's degree in city planning with an emphasis on housing policy and real estate development, actually. And then when I got out of graduate school, I worked for a regional nonprofit housing development corporation called Eden Housing. They're still around. They're one of the biggest affordable housing developers in the Bay Area. And then I went to the finance side and worked for myself, actually, as a consultant to many different banks. And the affordable housing industrial complex is what I call it, because the mechanisms by which we use to finance affordable housing in the US is very complex. We use public-private partnerships, and I can quickly get into the weeds of how we put those things together. Then I sort of had a realization as well when the redevelopment agencies in California were dissolved by Jerry Brown in 2012. And that was really the instigator for the creation of the film festival. When Jerry Brown dissolved the redevelopment agencies to balance the California budget, he was basically taking Peter to feed Paul, or whatever that story is. He was taking money from affordable housing, trying to balance the budget to pay for schools, which is crazy, right? We should have money just for both those things. But the thing that really got me was that I've been working in the affordable housing sector, and there was really no public groundswell understanding of this complex mechanism that we've created. So there was no public outcry in the sense of we need to keep redevelopment agencies, because at that point, redevelopment agencies was one leg of a three-legged stool, providing a third of the financing for affordable housing. When you take away a third of the financing for affordable housing, you basically reduce the amount of affordable housing that's created by a third. So that's what actually happened. And that's contributing to the homeless crisis that we have today. So that set of 10 sentences that I just said, I was thinking, there's no way that me saying this 10 times over by myself to educate people is going to be effective. So what if I created a platform where other people were saying it too? And in the meantime, I was like, who do I know are the most effective communicators? And in the meantime, I had taught myself screenwriting, not very good, but I had met a whole bunch of documentary filmmakers. So I was like, you know who's really good at storytelling and communication are filmmakers. Oh, why don't I put the people who are really bad at communicating, the people in affordable housing and urban planners, with people who are really good at communicating, and like make a Reese's Pieces thing and put them together. That was the birth of the SF Urban Film Fest. And it's still the framework that we use. You can still see that, right, in the things that we do.
Yes, and I'm so glad you said all those 10 sentences, because I'm one of the many people who goes around saying, why can't we do something about homelessness? And I think your average person has no idea about how the ability to create housing has been sort of diminished, not sort of, but definitely diminished by that, and where money would come from to create affordable housing. So I'm so glad you just went through that, because at a past conversation you and I had, I asked you that exact same thing. Why why can't we just have affordable housing? And you explained it to me, but it's not something that I would have ever known, because I don't know anything about policy really, or where money comes from for those types of projects.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really interesting because, well, just speaking for myself, I feel like a lot of people, the urban planners and transit planners and people that you have on your panels actually are really good communicators. But you're right. How do you draw people into that room to listen to them? Because if you just said, come to this meeting with this urban planner, nobody's going to come. But if you say, come watch these films
It's actually the same people that come.
yes. Yeah, I see what you mean. That's right. But when you're offering films and a glass of wine and some cheese and crackers and other yummy treats, you're going to get a whole different crowd in there. So This year, I attended 2 events at the festival, and they were about something I'd never heard of that I'm hoping we can talk about, and they are cultural districts. Can you explain what is a cultural district?
Yes, I can. A cultural district is a legal entity created by the state of California to preserve and cultivate ethnic enclaves in cities and in rural areas. So, for example, in the city of San Francisco, there's, I think, 8 or 9 cultural districts. One of the oldest is Calle 24, and they are located obviously on 24th Street in the Mission, and they were created to cultivate and preserve the Latino community there. The idea being if there was a legal entity, a district, that there would be a way to create a stronger network for all the organizations, all the arts and cultural organizations that are located in that geographic area. And then that district would advocate on behalf of the smaller organizations for funding, for better zoning. And then they expanded the cultural districts to also advocate for artists and therefore for everything else within the artist support structure, including affordable housing. Because if you're going to preserve culture, you're going to have to preserve the artists, the performers, the musicians, and to help them stay in the city, you're going to have affordable housing and affordable transit and everything else that comes with living, thriving in the city that is very, very expensive and that is really structured not to support arts and culture as a community level enterprise. The flip side in San Francisco is that the arts and culture attract businesses and tourism. So it's been seen through that lens mostly, sort of like as a tourist attraction thing. When in fact, if you speak to the folks on the community level, it's more about families and keeping the culture bearers within the city and connected to intergenerational networks. So it's a very interesting time for cultural districts because they're really coming into their own and becoming sort of like a force and like they're really learning to go beyond like supporting like banners, and you see banners on the street that says this is the district of this and this, and really like learning how to navigate for sustainable and resilient and kind of complex programs and policies like affordable housing.
Right. That's really interesting, everything you just said, because historically, the last several decades, that area of the Mission has been the Latino area of town, but to create a cultural district addresses some of the problems that have been happening there. And for people who aren't familiar with San Francisco, can you, if you want to, if you can you talk a little bit about how the housing issue overlaps with the need for a cultural district? Because it might not be clear if you're not either in this urban area or in a urban area.
Yeah. So everybody's pretty much getting priced out of San Francisco, especially artists and cultural bearers. It's really expensive to live in San Francisco. And the artists and culture bearers probably have a hard time making ends meet. We have a rich array of arts and culture that's happening in San Francisco, but the way that cultural industrial complex is another cultural industrial complex. The US, we don't compensate artists very well unless you're like, Grammy level sort of artists. So if you're a struggling artist in San Francisco, there's not a lot of support for you. There's not a lot of support for low income folks, period, or low and moderate income folks, period. So a cultural district could come in and say, yes, we want to preserve the Soma Filipinas, for example. We want to preserve and cultivate the Filipino community that's been longstanding in Soma. We're going to support cultural spaces like Bindlestift, the theater, like Capel Gardens, which is the outdoor venue. But we also want to support the artists and performers and actors and musicians who are Filipino, who have lived in Soma for a long time, by advocating to build more affordable housing in Soma so that they can stay in Soma, and that the physical proximity, the geographic connection is really important in terms of cultivating culture. It's very difficult to cultivate culture with long geographic distances between people. So it's really important to have people close to each other. And that's why it's important to have a lot of affordable housing for artists and for other low and moderate income folks within cultural districts.
Yeah, it sort of prevents when you're talking about this, I think of places like Venice in Italy, or there's a complaint that the city has just sort of been hollowed out in a way that it's only a place for tourists. And there are a lot of places in San Francisco that, because the culture is so rich, that's where new higher income people want to move to. Whereas in the past, higher income people moved to higher income neighborhoods. But now a lot of higher income people are moving to lower income neighborhoods because the culture there is so rich. And you get this, as you said, the banner post type of cultural markers where you could almost put, here once was this culture, and as opposed to that culture actually thriving there. And I just, to clarify also for people who aren't familiar with San Francisco, that Soma refers to south of Market, which is an area in San Francisco. And Soma, Filipinas is a cultural district where traditionally the Filipino community has lived, but also had incredible arts like the theater that Fay just mentioned. So I was looking on the cultural district's website, and they're obviously not up to date. I think they have 2 cultural districts in San Francisco, but you said there were 9?
I think there's 8 or 9. There's Japantown, there's Soma Filipinas, there's the American Indian Cultural District, which is the newest cultural district. There's the other LGBTQ cultural district. There's the transgender cultural district. And interestingly, Chinatown does not have a cultural district.
Right. There's also, is there an African American?
Right. There's an African American cultural district in the Bayview.
So is there like this sprouting up that has happened recently, or is just the website far behind in updating these cultural districts? Is this something that's really taking off?
Oh, there's a Castro cultural. I think that what happened was during the pandemic. Okay, so the cultural district is a legal entity that's not funded by the state. So you get the designation by the state, but each city has to fundraise themselves to fund the cultural district. In San Francisco, we decided that we would fund the cultural districts through hotel tax. So during the pandemic, obviously there was no hotel occupancy, so there was no hotel taxes being generated. So it woke up the cultural districts. They're like, oh my God, we are a thing, but we haven't been active. Like, we just took it for granted that we'll just sit here and, like, I'm putting words in their mouth. Some of them have been active, but it really woke them up and said, we can't just, assume that we'll get funded. We have to organize ourselves to make sure we get funded, so this is something that they've been doing. And because the cultural districts have folks who run the districts who are both like administrators and people who worked in arts and culture, I think that they're much better at communicating for themselves versus like affordable housing people who also lost their money, right? But still, you don't know what I'm talking about. So,
right.
So that's why there's a lot more awareness of cultural districts, I think. I think that they were sort of shocked into becoming much more vociferous because of the hotel tax being reduced, and that the prospect of them not having funding made them much more politically active.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'll do them one at a time. Why did you decide to focus more on cultural districts this Festival. I think you did talk about them a couple of years ago, but I felt like you had a couple of programs completely about cultural districts. What brought on that decision?
I think two things. One is that we've been artists in residency at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and we were able to keep going, even though the residency started on March 16th, which is the day we went into shelter in place, March 2020. So it was literally a 2-year residency during the pandemic. And because we have a really unique strength, which is that we are able to work with a lot of different communities, and we were able to keep our lights on and actually ramp up our programming during the residency. I mean, a lot has to do with the budgets that we got from YBCA during the residency. So we had a lot of funding to do our stuff, and we also had a lot of agency. So we did a few programs in the Bayview and a few programs in South of Market with the Filipino community. The stuff that we did in the Bayview was mostly around the storytelling on the African American community there. And we wanted to highlight our work in all these different neighborhoods and communities. And we wanted to convene all these different neighborhoods and communities all together as our sort of like capstone residency event or program statement, really to highlight and show SFUS's ability, to our ability, the film festival's ability to work in different communities, but also to be aspirational for the cultural districts, to see that they are coming into their own, and that perhaps working together, they could be stronger, because they actually share a lot of basic interests, which is around creating affordable housing for their artists. And then the other thing is we've been looking for a way to hang our hat on the confluence or the intersection of film and urban planning. And if you take it to a higher level, it's really around the confluence of arts and culture and urban planning. So in a sense, cultural districts are that. They are actually the confluence of arts and culture and community planning. So we see that a lot of promise in terms of strengthening cultural districts and their capacities to do a lot of community planning. I don't think all of them see themselves as that. I think a few of them do. They are working at different levels. Some folks are really moving forward in terms of acquiring permanent spaces for their arts and cultural organizations. Some are just like learning about that. Some are way, way ahead in terms of understanding how to manipulate the zoning code to preserve their communities. So yeah, we see a lot of promise in cultural districts.
Well, I think I told you this, but when I come to the San Francisco or the SF Urban Film Fest, I always leave with restored faith in humanity. And that was the same this year. And I feel like the festival started at a really bleak time, maybe right around the beginning of the war in Ukraine. And, it's not coming at the end of a really super happy 2 years. And you create this space where when you're there, you feel like you can imagine how things could be different. And in certain circumstances, the things you imagine already exist. But I'm wondering what it's like for you as the organizer, looking back over this time. How are you feeling about the work that you're doing? And I also, because you do have this urban planning background and your interest in social justice, what is your vision for a city, but maybe particularly San Francisco? So I know that's a big two-parted question, but that's my question.
Okay, so I'm going to talk from a place of privilege, just acknowledge that. The chaos of the pandemic is really our opportunity to reimagine a lot of things. And yes, the pandemic absolutely hurt a lot of people. The deaths in disproportionate impact in communities of color should have never happened, but it was predictable. And I want to acknowledge that loss and the injustice in that. But at the same time, everyone became aware of it, that there's this disparity in impact. And no, the pandemic was not the great equalizer. It just showed how disequal we all are. So there's an increased awareness of this, of the structural injustice that exists everywhere in the US, specifically in San Francisco. So just that awareness, okay, and coming from a place of privilege to be able to look at it objectively, I acknowledge it. The second thing is that, again, the pandemic shows that the city cannot bank solely on tech for its future. When the pandemic happened, tech basically left San Francisco because it wasn't fun anymore. I can Google that statement and it'll show up in so many articles. That is an affront, and I really feel like that needs to be acknowledged, that we as a city have this opportunity to really think about the people who stayed and the people who committed to this city. Who are those people? And they're the ones who are going to rebuild the city. And we're the ones who are going to stick around when the going gets tough. And then the third thing is that at a physical level, at the built environment level, we're going to have an empty financial district for the most part. What are we going to do with that? What are we going to do with that? I don't think that we're going to have folks come back and work in the office full time anymore. So there's going to be a drop in occupancy for office buildings. And we're going to have this excess physical asset and these entire blocks of city blocks that are basically ghost-like. Mm-hmm. What are we going to do with that? I mean, I can't answer that, but that conversation needs to start to be had. Mm. And who is going to benefit from that area anymore? Who's going to decide also? What's the process like? So I just see a lot of questions, and with a lot of questions, there's opportunity for change. Mm. So that's the feeling that we want to bring every time we have a SF Urban Film Fest. That all these decisions that have been made to now are decisions that people made, and that you can make different ones starting now. That the physical environment, the policies and programs, none of them are foregone conclusions. None of them. The minute you walk into a convening, you can start a whole different conversation that will change the way we go forward. That's the feeling we want to give, the sense of hope, not just hope, but like actual, like, you are it. You're the ones who we've been waiting for. And that's just true.
Right. Wow. That also gives me, not to use that word too much, but that also gives me hope. Because I think that you are doing that, which is why I really wanted to talk to you and hear about this, because I think that it is creating a conversation, and it is asking different questions than what might possibly be asked if the same people were always in the room or at the table. Well, Fay, where can people find out more about the SF Urban Film Fest, and how can they support the work that you're doing?
Oh, yes. There's so many ways you can engage with us and support us. Our website is SF Urban Film Fest, and our social media handle is SF Urban Film Fest. And where you donate is at SF Urban Film Fest. So we just had our festival, so we won't have very many events coming up soon. But we're really active on social media, and you should just go to our Instagram and like play some of our highlights just to check us out of like the stuff that we've done. And yeah, most of the stuff that we've been doing for the residency is on Instagram. But what I really want for your audience to really consider is when you walk out the door, you're literally making urban planning decisions. whether or not you're going to take the bus, whether or not you can walk, whether you're going to take the car, those things are those decisions that you make every day are influenced by urban planning decisions that have been made in the past. And if you don't like the choices that you have, well, that's something that you can do something about, because it touches you, it touches your family members, it touches your neighbors. Urban planning touches everyone all the time. And these are decisions that urban planners make. You think that that's true, but that's not true. Yes, they do. They implement certain things, but it's really up to you to want to decide today that you walk out the door and you're mad that you have to, navigate this scary crosswalk. I mean, you need to write to your supervisor and you need to tweet at Jerry Tumlin at SFMTA or SFMuni. The city's yours.
Well, thank you so much for being on this episode. Yes.
Thank you.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Thank you to Fay Darmawi for being on the show and talking to us about SF Urban Film Fest, about cultural districts, and the role that they play in equitable growth and affordable housing. If you want to learn more about the SF Urban Film Fest, check them out at sfurbanfilmfest.com. You don't have to be in the Bay Area to find something here for you and your community. Let's start the conversations. Remember, the city is ours. The music you've heard in this podcast is Yellow Light District by Lobo Loco. Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 15 in D major was performed by Karina Galanian. The music you heard in the intro is by Ketsa. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today. What resonated with you? Did you have ideas about ways that your city or town could become more equitable and function better for more of its residents? How could you start this conversation? If you like this episode, please share it with a friend.